He had a gun in his mouth when she found him. Behind the hotel, behind the dumpsters, behind everything. It was 3:27 a.m. when Eloise Richardson, a black janitor nearing 60, pushed her cleaning cart into the rear loading bay of the Navy Inn near Norfolk. She wasn't supposed to be back there, but she'd run out of bleach, and fate, apparently, had run out of mercy. She turned the corner and froze. A young white man in uniform, kneeling, shaking, crying, mouth on metal, trigger finger twitching, and for one terrifying second, he didn't even see her. "Baby, don't." That's all she said. No screaming, no judgment. Just those two words, soft but undeniable, and somehow that was enough. He dropped the gun and fell apart. Most people would have run, called the front desk, let security handle it. But Eloise? She stepped closer. This wasn't her first ghost. She'd buried one of her own. Marcus, 23, Marine, PTSD, dead by silence. So when this trembling boy whispered, "I can't breathe anymore," she knelt beside him, hands steady as stone, and said, "Then let me hold the air for you tonight." No one ever thanked her. There were no headlines, no medals, no viral hashtags, just a broken soldier in a back alley, and a janitor who refused to walk away. 6 years later, the United States Congress opened a national hearing on military mental health, and a newly elected congressman walked up to the microphone. Young, polished, composed. He paused, then said, "Before you hear my policy, you need to hear my truth." He unfolded a small paper. His voice trembled, but did not break. "I was supposed to die that night behind the Navy Inn. I would have. But a woman, a janitor, chose to sit beside me in the dark. I never knew her name, but today I do. Her name is Eloise Richardson." What the world didn't know was about to be revealed. A hotel janitor, a soldier's life, a hidden act of mercy that would echo across the nation. And it all started with a mop, a loaded gun, and 2 words. "Baby, don't." If you were saved by a stranger, would you ever forget their face? What if you were that stranger? Some nights didn't end, they just faded, like a bruise under skin, hidden, but there. That was how Eloise Richardson measured time now. Not in days, not in weeks, but in the stains that refused to come out of uniform collars, in the hum of vending machines that whispered more than they sold, in the silence that screamed every time she passed room 214. The Navy Inn wasn't glamorous, but it was government paid, government approved, and government forgotten. It stood off I-64 like a tired veteran, still standing, but weary. Its carpets coughed dust. Its walls sagged under secrets. Its vending machines knew more about trauma than the therapists down the road. And through those halls wandered Eloise, mop in hand, memories on her back. 15 years. 15 years of graveyard shifts, cleaning up after the country's broken heroes, men and women in uniforms too big for their souls. She never asked names, never needed stories. The stains always spoke first. But nothing screamed louder than room 214. That was Marcus's room. Not literally, but it might as well have been. Every time she passed it, something hollow echoed in her chest. Like the sound of folded flags hitting mahogany. Like the silence after a final gunshot. One not fired in war, but in a bedroom. Marcus Richardson, 23, Marine. Son. He came back without shrapnel, without visible scars, but something inside him never returned. He laughed less, spoke less, ate less, until one day he stopped completely. A note, a neat bed, a single bullet, and silence. Sharp, permanent, merciless. They called it accidental discharge. Eloise called it the final consequence of being unheard. So when she found that other boy, 6 years ago, curled behind the dumpster, lips on steel, shaking like a prayer, she didn't hesitate. She had seen this ghost before. It wore Marcus's eyes. They never exchanged names. She never asked where he came from. He never asked why her hand smelled like bleach and peppermint tea. Some pain is too sacred for small talk. But that moment, him with the gun, her with nothing but tired hands and a broken heart, that moment stitched time, and the thread held until it snapped. 5 years later, HR called her in. A violation. Unauthorized use of hotel facilities. Apparently, someone had pulled an old security tape. There she was, helping a distressed guest in a staff-only zone. Protocol violation. Liability concern. Image risk. No warning. No explanation. Just a form. A forced signature. And a long walk out the back door. The same one she'd once walked through to save a life. Eloise didn't cry. She'd run out of tears years ago. Instead, she folded her uniform, placed it in a plastic grocery bag, and left through the side exit, past the wall where he once knelt, past the trash bins that had witnessed more trauma than the hotel cameras, past the security guards who didn't make eye contact. She took the late bus home, past the cemetery where Marcus slept beneath clipped grass and forgotten medals, past the base that trained boys into ghosts. She sat by the window, hands folded, lips tight. People called her invisible, but that night she felt gone. And yet, somewhere, beyond the quiet, beyond the resignation, a spark survived. Because fate doesn't forget mercy. And silence? Silence can be broken. In a city far away, on a morning heavy with headlines, a voice was preparing to speak. And when it did, it would say her name. What happens to kindness when no one is watching? Sometimes it grows teeth. Sometimes it finds a microphone. It began with a name. Just one, spoken in a congressional chamber lined with marble, microphones, and forgetfulness. Eloise Richardson. The room went still. The voice came from a young man. Mid-30s, sharp suit, sharp jawline, the kind of face that looks better on campaign posters than on a battlefield. But his voice cracked, just slightly, and that single crack sliced through every polished surface in the room. Before the policy brief, before the camera-ready remarks, he said he needed to tell a story, one the country hadn't heard, but should have. There was a night, he began, 6 years ago, when I decided the war was over for me. Not because of a mission, not because of combat, but because of what came after. No one warns you about the ghosts you bring home, about the way your own mind becomes enemy territory. The senators shifted. The cameras zoomed in. America leaned closer. I sat behind a hotel with a pistol in my mouth. My hand trembled, but not enough. My hope? Gone. My breath? Shallow. My name? Didn't matter. Pause. A silence that ached. And then, someone found me. A janitor. Graying hair, cleaning gloves, peppermint tea. No rank, no clearance, no agenda. Just a woman who looked me in the eye and said, "Baby, don't." He swallowed. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't ask questions. She just stayed. Sat beside me on cold concrete like it was church. Wrapped me in a blanket like it was armor. The crowd didn't move. No coughs, no murmurs, just breathing. She saw my lowest moment and treated it like it was sacred. Her name, he said it again, Eloise Richardson. Until last week, I didn't know it. I'd searched before, quietly. Called the hotel, nothing. But last month, someone forwarded me a clip. Security footage. Grainy, old. But it was her. A pause. She had been fired for helping me. That hit hard. Even the coldest politicians blinked. And I'm here now, alive, functioning, serving this country, not because of war, but because of her mercy. It hit the news cycle in minutes. Janitor saved congressman from suicide, then got fired. Veteran tells Congress his life was saved by black hotel worker. The peppermint tea that changed policy. It wasn't just a story. It became a question. Who else saved someone and was buried in silence? Eloise didn't know. She was in her kitchen when her neighbor banged on the door. "Girl, turn on the news!" She didn't move, didn't want to. But the name reached her ears before she touched the remote. Her name, There it was, her worn face in grainy black and white security footage, her voice recreated by headlines, her hands, those same hands that had scrubbed floors, now being called the hands that held America together. She dropped into her chair like gravity had doubled. Not from pride, not from shame, but from something she hadn't felt in years, weightless grief, because even after all this time, he remembered. Not her uniform, not her badge, not her age, her mercy. That night she sat in silence, didn't answer calls, didn't reply to messages, just brewed a cup of peppermint tea, wrapped herself in an old blanket, and sat on the floor. Same tea, same ritual, same woman, but the world outside had changed. In Washington, the headlines grew. Petitions were filed. Hearings were demanded. The congressman proposed a new act, the Richardson Bill, to provide protection and recognition to civilian employees who aid service members in crisis. He didn't call it charity. He called it justice long overdue. Meanwhile, journalists dug deeper. Why was she fired? How many other civilian heroes have been silenced? Does the system punish compassion? And Eloise? She still didn't speak to reporters, but someone else did. The hotel's former head of security. She saved him, he admitted in a shaky interview. We all saw it, but policy said she violated protocol, and no one wanted bad press. He looked down. I didn't fight for her. Suddenly, silence had a face, a cost, a name, and the woman no one saw became the woman no one could ignore. What is justice worth when it comes years too late? And who speaks for those who acted long before it was safe to be brave? It's strange how silence can be louder than applause. The next morning, the news hadn't stopped. Her name, Eloise Richardson, was trending in a world that had ignored her for decades. TV anchors smiled as they mispronounced it. Senators tweeted it like it was a brand. Young activists posted black and white photos of her hands, calling them the hands that healed. But Eloise? She sat alone in her living room. TV off, phone face down, curtains drawn, as if she could keep the world out simply by refusing to look at it. The peppermint tea had gone cold, but she still held it in both hands, like a ritual, like a memory. Like Marcus, the moment you become visible, you become a target. That thought echoed in her ribs. She'd spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, of being essential but unseen, of moving like breath, felt but never acknowledged. And now the world wanted to see her, wanted to celebrate her. After taking everything, she opened one letter, just one. From the VA, thank you for your service to the veteran community. We are reviewing your case. She didn't know whether to laugh or tear it up, so she folded it back, neatly, like Marcus's flag. Later that day, someone knocked. Not press, not politicians. A woman, mid-40s Marine mom. Eyes swollen like she'd been crying for years. She held out a folded piece of paper. My son, she whispered. He didn't make it, but he used to talk about a janitor at the Navy Inn. Said she made the hallway smell like peppermint. Said she was the only person who looked him in the eye. She paused. Was that you? Eloise nodded, just once. The woman cried harder, but softer too, like the sound of healing beginning. That night, Eloise pulled the box out from the back of her closet, the one she hadn't opened in 9 years. Inside, Marcus's old boots, a faded birthday card, his field journal, a napkin with the words, I'm trying, Mama, scribbled in shaky ink, and the hospital paperwork no one ever explained. She lit a candle, read a page aloud. His voice, scribbled in pencil, was messy but clear. They tell us to talk, but there's no one listening. They say we matter, but not once we're broken. I keep thinking, if I disappear, maybe someone will finally notice I was ever here. She sobbed. Not like in movies, not beautiful, not quiet. She sobbed like a mother who had carried too much silence for too long. Like someone who had buried her truth beneath bleach and overtime and broken elevators. Like someone who had finally been heard. The next day, her photo was on the cover of a national magazine. The janitor who changed the narrative. And below it, Eloise Richardson, The black woman America forgot until she saved it. There were invitations, interviews, panel requests, even a call from a senator's office asking if she'd be willing to speak at a bipartisan mental health summit. She didn't respond, not because she was ungrateful, but because something inside her was still catching up. And yet, she knew one thing: she wasn't invisible anymore. But visibility is not freedom. It's just the beginning of the fight. When the world finally sees you, will it honor you or consume you? Will it listen or simply move on? Long before the peppermint tea, long before the blanket behind the dumpster, there was Marcus, her son, her heartbeat, her reason. He joined the Marines at 18, just like his father. But he came back carrying something Eloise couldn't wash off his uniform. Not with bleach, not with prayer. It wasn't dirt. It was something darker. Disappointment. Marcus never said much when he returned, but silence has a shape, and hers took the form of closed doors, sleepless nights, and a son who once laughed with his entire chest now barely smiled with his eyes. One night she found his field journal under the mattress. She never meant to read it, but it fell open, and some pages scream even when written in pencil. They call me smart like it's a surprise. I report a white superior who grabbed a girl's neck. He gets promoted, I get reassigned. They say it's not racism. It's just how the system works. I asked for therapy. They gave me push-ups. Eloise clutched the journal like it had pulse. She could feel his breath in the margins, could hear the between the lines that screamed louder than the words. He never told her he was being followed. Never told her he found the slur "black wall" carved into his locker. Never told her that in his last deployment, a fellow soldier had sabotaged his field gear, and the officer covered it up. He protected her, while the world failed to protect him. One memory refused to fade. Marcus at 12. They were walking home from church, and he asked, "Mama, do soldiers get to save people?" She smiled. "Of course they do, baby. They train so hard just for that." He had paused, thinking. Then what happens if the world never lets us save them? She hadn't known how to answer then. She still didn't. When the news called Marcus's death a tragic accident, Eloise stared at the TV until the screen turned blue. No one mentioned his race. No one mentioned the complaint he filed 2 weeks before. No one mentioned the disciplinary officer who denied him psychiatric evaluation. That's the thing about institutional injustice. It never raises its voice. It just edits the report. And so, years later, when she saw another black boy being dragged by security at the Navy Inn for loitering, she stepped between them and whispered, "Not today." When she saw a young Latina maid getting written up for wearing sneakers to support her bad back, she gave her her own pair. When she found a pale, broken soldier behind the dumpster, gun in hand, eyes full of ghosts, she didn't see a white man. She saw Marcus. All of them were Marcus. Because racism doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes with silence, with policy, with procedure. Her compassion was not softness. It was memory. It was justice. It was rebellion. The hotel fired her for violating rules. But the truth was, she was guilty of remembering and refusing to forget. Racism doesn't always burn crosses. Sometimes it just closes doors and calls it structure. Will you still open yours? Eloise didn't plan to speak. She wasn't a podium person, wasn't made for stages, suits, or polished statements. But sometimes, silence becomes betrayal. Not to the world, to the memory. To Marcus, she spent 3 days reading. Not speeches, not interviews, names. The names of janitors, cafeteria workers, parking lot attendants, black workers, mostly, who had been fired, dismissed, or ignored after stepping in to help someone in uniform. Not one had been reinstated. Not one had a voice. So when the senator's office called again, this time to formally invite her to the bipartisan summit on mental health and military equity, she didn't say yes. She just said, "Will they listen?" When they answered yes, she replied, "Then I'll come, but I won't entertain. I'll testify." The Capitol looked different this time. It wasn't just marble and power. It was ghosts. Marcus's ghost. The girl whose neck was grabbed. The black sergeant who was denied counseling. The soldier behind the dumpster. They all walked beside her, in silence, but not in shame. She wore a simple gray blouse. Pressed pants, no makeup, no mic technician fussing with her collar. But when she stepped onto that stage, the room shifted, because when a woman who's been ignored her whole life finally speaks, the world leans in. No written remarks, no clever lines, just a voice that carried decades of dust, bleach, grief, and fire. My name is Eloise Richardson. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a senator. I clean things. I listen. I remember. And I am here today not because I saved a congressman, but because the system tried to erase me after I did. I want to talk about silence, the kind that grows in break rooms, in complaint boxes that go nowhere, in empty chairs where therapists should be, in the gap between thank you for your service and you're fired. My son died not because of war. He died because he asked for help and was told to man up. Because when he reported an assault, the other guy got a promotion. Because when he broke down, the system said, get back in line. He wrote in his journal, they won't notice me until I'm gone. A beat of silence. Then she looked straight at the cameras. So I'm here now, not to be remembered, but to make sure you don't forget him, or all the others you never bothered to see. The room didn't erupt. It inhaled, held its breath, and changed shape. That night, news anchors tried to summarize her words, but they couldn't, because some truths can't be trimmed into sound bites. They must be carried. In the following days, the Richardson bill gained bipartisan support. Several wrongful terminations of civilian staff were reopened. Veterans' mental health resources were expanded on 3 bases. And Eloise? She went home. Didn't give more speeches, didn't write a book, but she kept a chair in her kitchen open. For soldiers who needed to sit. For ghosts who needed to rest. For Marcus, always. Not all heroes march. Some mop floors, hold broken hands, and dare to speak when silence becomes a sin. It started with a headline, a bitter one. Janitor's hero story overblown, says former hotel executive. The article came from an opinion piece, written by Alan Royston, former vice president of operations at the Navy Inn chain. He hadn't spoken publicly since the scandal broke. Now he had, and he wanted the last word. In his column, he called Eloise's story incomplete, claimed she had a history of disciplinary issues, said the footage lacked context, that the congressman romanticized a one-time incident into a national crusade, that it was never about race. Social media lit up. Some readers believed him. Others were furious. But the damage? It lingered, like rot beneath fresh paint. Eloise didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't call a lawyer. She wrote a letter, not to Royston, to the Washington Post, and they published it, unedited. Dear Mr. Royston, you're right. I'm not a hero. Heroes wear capes. I wore bleach stains. Heroes have medals. I had mop handles that gave me blisters. But I was there, and you weren't. I remember the soldier's hands shaking. I remember the pistol sliding out of reach. I remember the weight in his eyes. The silence in his throat. I didn't ask his name. I just sat. Because sitting is what no one else did. And if that's all I did, sit beside someone who was crumbling, then I'll do it again. And again. And again. You say this was never about race. I say you've never had to say that sentence and mean it. You say I had a disciplinary record. I say your policies disciplined compassion. You say I was just doing my job. I say the job was never the problem. Your definition of it was. You can keep your version. I'll keep the truth. Eloise Richardson. The letter went viral in 3 hours. Not because it was clever, but because it was unapologetically real. That night, a former housekeeper at the Navy Inn commented anonymously. Eloise covered my shift once so I could take my kid to chemo. She never told anyone. Just said, go be a mom. Then another. She once used her lunch break to calm down a veteran in the stairwell having a panic attack. She wasn't assigned. She just saw him. then dozens, then hundreds. Suddenly, Royston's op-ed looked like a bitter relic, trying to shout down a rising choir. And Eloise? She never responded again, because she didn't need to. The world had. That week, she was invited to speak at Howard University for a symposium on everyday justice. She walked on stage not as a janitor, not as a viral name, but as a woman who redefined quiet resistance. And her first words? I've been called many things: maid, help, nobody, too much, not enough. But never before have I been called heard. You know your truth is powerful when even your silence becomes a reply. It was raining. Of course it was. Washington had a way of crying when people couldn't. Eloise walked between rows of white headstones, her umbrella too small, her heart wide open. This time she wasn't carrying silence. She was carrying a letter. The air smelled like wet stone and clipped grass. She knew the path by heart now. Plot 17, Section D, Row 4, Marcus Richardson. Marine, sun, ghost, home. She knelt without hesitation. No tears. Not this time. She placed the letter on the grave, weighed down with a smooth river stone. Not for decoration, but because things that matter shouldn't blow away. Then, quietly, she began to speak. Hey, baby. I did it. I said it all. I told them everything you couldn't. Everything they wouldn't hear from you. I used your words. I used my voice. And Marcus, they listened. Her voice cracked, but she didn't. They know your name now. They know what they did. And what they didn't do. They called me brave. Isn't that something? Me. Just your mama. The quiet one. But you know what? Brave isn't loud. It's what happens when you keep showing up, even after the world stops asking you to. She smiled, wiped the corner of her eye with the back of her sleeve. You told me once, if you disappeared, maybe someone would notice you were here. Well, baby, they noticed, and I made damn sure they'll remember. She sat there for a long while, listening to the rain, to the silence, to the peace she had waited years to feel. Eventually, she stood, brushed off her knees, saluted. Just once. Clean, crisp, steady. But before she turned to leave, she noticed a small envelope tucked beside the gravestone. Not hers. No name on it. Just a wax seal, and the initials JDV. She opened it. Inside, one sentence, written in careful, deliberate hand. You saved him. Now he's saving others. No signature. No need. She smiled. Not big. Not for show. Just enough. As she walked back to the gate, the sky began to open. Rain softened. Light broke through gray, and somewhere between shadow and sunlight, a mother walked out of grief. Not empty, but full. 2 weeks later, a plaque was installed in the Navy Inn staff hallway. Small, brass, quiet. It read, "To Eloise Richardson, for choosing mercy when no one was watching, and making history when no one asked her to. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes it carries a mop. Sometimes it just refuses to disappear."